trailblazer and breaking out of established trends takes courage. Gaming in the early to mid-80s was dominated by boy-oriented space shooters inspired by Star Wars or whatever retro sci-fi show you can think of. You had your Galagas, your Mooncrestas, and your Scrambles, just to name some of the shoot-em-up dads. All of them had identical themes because young boys were still captivated by the fantasies of epic space battles. Then the year 1986 came along, and the diligent developers at Capcom start advertising this new game that puts an angelic woman front and center rather than the burly men you usually see on the sales flyers. It doesn't seem like a big deal today, but that was exceptionally uncommon during the era, alongside Samus secretly being a woman in Metroid. Coincidentally, that also came out in 1986. I'd imagine that drew quite a bit of attention to the game while it was fresh, because Michelle Hart isn't some princess in another castle. She dives straight into danger, ready to kick your arsenal, paving the way for much more well-known powerhouses like Chun-Li in the process. This ain't the year 1986 though, it's the year 2021, and I wasn't even born when Legendary Wings first took flight. It's been reintroduced to a new audience for the first time in 8 years thanks to Capcom Arcade Stadium, originally being ported to Capcom Arcade Cabinet in 2013, 2 decades after its initial release. Strong female protagonists, like Lara Croft, are well established alongside their action man counterparts, and can't draw attention to a game on its own anymore. Especially since some versions of the game replace Michelle Hart with a generic dude, leaving us with the traits that matter the most in a video game: the presentation and the gameplay. I was delighted to find out that Legendary Wings holds up fairly well. Legendary Wings is a hybrid shoot-em-up platforming game that whisks you into an epic battle through 5 levels divided into 2 sections each, switching game styles when you enter palaces that are too cramped to fly in. You and a partner, if you brought one, are tasked by Ares, the god of war, to save the planet from decimation at the hands of the supercomputer, Dark, which caused all the world's machinery to malfunction and rebel against their creators, in a sci-fi setup heavily inspired by Terminator 2 and possibly Might and Magic. A great backdrop for not only the action, but the world in which you fight, setting Legendary Wings apart from even R-Type and Salamander. That'll lead into discussing the presentation, as it is consistently superb throughout the entire game. How about a semi-futuristic world that merges ancient architecture and Greek mythology with Skynet? It's as cool and unique as it sounds. I wouldn't expect anything less from the house that brought you the dilapidated villages of ghosts and goblins. None of those ideas would have worked out if it weren't for the insane talents of the illustrators, who meticulously shaded even the most inconspicuous of statues. Glitter like that would leave a positive first impression on anyone taking a gander from afar, with the second most important part of any game passing inspections with flying colors. All that was left was ensuring the game played well. I'm going to talk about the shooting and platforming segments separately to make my critiques of them easier to follow, starting with the shoot-em-up sections, as that's how the first level begins. You soar across the screen the moment you tap a direction, you got a button for shooting your gun, and you got a button for dropping a bomb, Xevious style. Legendary Wings happily ignores what Konami were doing with their games and falls back to established conventions from 1982. It's simple, it's snappy, it's mostly responsive. It is a little odd that your bombs will occasionally fail to drop if you press both buttons at once, but other than that, it's serviceable. Power-ups are similarly linear and self-explanatory, as your gun always gets better with each one, progressing from a pea shooter to a 3-way shot, and finally a piercing laser which decimates everything. You lose everything when you die, yada yada yada. That's not to say Legendary Wings is completely devoid of strategy, because you'll need to make a battle blend to overcome some of the most devious preset enemy patterns that rush towards you. However, thinking is less of a factor than it is in games like Gradius. There are plenty of other sections like this area in Stage 3 where enemies appear whenever they feel like it, putting your reflexes to the test with good old whack-a-mole game design. There is one complex aspect that'll make your life easier if you know about it, though. Taking another page out of the Xevious playbook, there are secret underground entrances scattered throughout the game that'll take you to a bonus round. These loot caves are filled with treasures that'll increase your score, but more importantly, there are also hidden mysteries buried within the walls that you have to shoot to reveal. These could contain an enemy, but most of the time it'll be a power-up. Gather 2 or 3 of those, and that could easily put you back on track if you're feeling weak and meek. The end result? 5 solidly designed stages of simplistic dodge and shoot fun that live or die depending on how impressive you think the stage design and environments are. Thankfully, Capcom didn't pull any punches with their unique world. All 5 of these levels are set in unique locales, and they feature new obstacles that aren't copy-pasted anywhere else, keeping things fresh and exciting. For example, the mountainside where you begin has the giant eagle statues that obstruct your shots and misangle them, while the futuristic city at the end have suicide bullet drones that you aren't supposed to shoot if you're too close to them. Observant players will also notice there's ongoing themes here too, beginning in the most low-tech area and gradually getting more and more modern as you progress to Dark's lair. Excellent game structure, especially by 1986 standards. Yep, these levels are as good as they can be. I'd give it 2 thumbs up. At the end of every stage, you bomb the guardians of a palace and land on the ground to infiltrate the stronghold, transitioning to a platforming stage. There were nowhere near as many platformers as there were shooting games in 1986, so lots of conventional game design had yet to be conceived. Super Mario Bros. And even Capcom's own Ghosts and Goblins came out only 1 year prior. Considering this game's age, the controls aged remarkably well. You turn around instantaneously the second you touch the joystick, and you walk at a fairly acceptable pace for the screen orientation. Much like Donkey Kong, you're committed to a jump the second you touch the jump button, encouraging you to look at where you're standing before you leap into disaster, which is all well and good. The good controls are coupled with a decent number of obstacles to shoot and dodge, a match that provides a good foundation for a challenge platformer. You've got missile generators that make the ground hazardous, and these energy orbs that get larger and more obnoxious to avoid the more you shoot at them, just as a few examples. None of these are too overwhelming to deal with, and more importantly, Capcom learned a lot of valuable lessons about spawn locations from Ghosts and Goblins. It's entirely fair because you won't run into any nonsense like enemies spawning directly on top of you with no warning. Theoretically, Legendary Wings would be a legendary game with design like that, right? Unfortunately, these platforming stages are missing something crucial to keep them engaging, something that Ghosts and Goblins had. Changes of scenery. Do you see those 2 backdrops? Sci-fi bass and monstrous guts? Yeah, those are the only 2 themes you get in every stage! Likewise, the enemies and the obstacles you have to avoid are just as stale, making every single palace feel like it's been copy-pasted from the previous level. Can you tell what level I'm on by looking at these 2 scenes? Duh! That's level 1 and level 3! It makes all those good ideas uninteresting because you've seen everything the platformer levels have to offer by the 2nd level. And that's a damn shame because the design is ahead of its time. But I can't in good conscience say that anyone would find this interesting. especially when the shooter stages give you new ideas to look forward to. I don't know whether it was due to a lack of time or a shortage of ideas, but if that were the case, doing something as simple as changing the colors of every base would be better than doing absolutely nothing. That's what Super Mario Bros. Did back on the NES, and that hardware was significantly less powerful compared to this arcade board. There's no excuse for that. For being a cool game that's half held back by one enormous design blunder, I give the arcade version of Legendary Wings a B+. Normally that would be the end of the video, but I want you to hold that thought on the level variety, because we're throwing the NES version in here as a bonus. It was released 2 years after the arcade, so what did you get when you brought the game home to weaker hardware? Half the arcade game. I don't have to tell you how the top-down shooting stages play since they're virtually identical to their arcade counterpart, but the side-scrolling segments were completely redone from scratch, fixing the biggest issue with Legendary Wings by giving those areas much-needed variety. In fact, they got rid of the platforming entirely and made them shooting segments too. These levels introduce brand new enemies and obstacles not seen in the arcade version, essentially giving you double the game the arcade version was. This is the ideal version of Legendary Wings the arcade version wanted to be. The extra year and however many months of development time that were allocated into coming up with ideas for this version really paid off, because you're always wondering what the next area is going to look like, and you're never bored in the process. There's even some levels where you can freely turn left and right to hit some targets that come behind you too. There's no doubt that this is the superior version of Legendary Wings, even if the artwork can't be as good as its arcade cousin. The NES version of Legendary Wings gets an A for fixing all the problems of the arcade version and retaining everything that was already great about it. That's 2 games down with 1 shot. Thank you for tuning in like always. If you enjoyed your ride on this flight, make sure you hit the subscribe button and a bell right next to it in case this crazy show takes off again.